Muntamosha, the views and opinions of interviewees in this video do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Love Life. If you have a complaint about something or find the content here too offensive, when upegelen. On a serious note, slide into our DMs, let us know go to Hlabeke Gupi, and we'll do better.
Hello, my name is Pamela, mostly known as Sana King, who is a poet, an award-winning author, as well as a visual artist. I am doing my honors at Wits University in Fine Arts, and I currently reside in Braamfontein at Student Diggz.
It's your boy, Batiles Pure Mahopa, Cool, Cozy and Collected Boys. He's Pure on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Third-year student at UJ, currently studying computer science. Originally, I'm from Tembisa, 1632 represent, but I'm currently residing in Braamfontein at Student Diggz, as you guys might see. 1590 Corte is the location. Come through and check us out. Honestly, I don't even remember, but then it was probably sometime around high school, you know, when it was forced down your throat in your LO, life orientation, for those that don't know. Yeah, back then, years ago.
The last time I actually read the Bill of Rights was somewhere in grade 10, 11, 12, somewhere there, but for my life orientation. Yes, I care about my rights.
I do, personally I do, but only when they violate it. It wouldn't be a thing which I have the right to do this, I have the right to do this. I wouldn't force my rights down your throat like that unless you're violating them. So yeah, personally I do care about my rights. When I'm being shut down, when I'm not being able to voice what I have to say to people, you know, when I'm literally told, nah, dog, relax, it doesn't really matter. Like, I will enforce that right to you, but I have the right to voice my opinion, because I'm that type of person, I guess.
I don't really wear them up to my sleeve. I'm not really conscious of them until something that violates my right comes into play. That's when I would say, oh no, actually you can't do that because that is against my rights, you know? So how do I practice my rights? Like, I feel like I am practicing my right now because I am expressing myself, and I mentioned myself being a poet and an author. So I write books and I perform. So things that I cannot put into words, like with sentences or formal writing, I would write in a poem, in a poetry form. I wouldn't know which section it is, and I am trying to think about what should apply more frequently. I think what should apply more frequently, especially to women, for us women and children, is the right to safety. I feel that our right is often violated because women are not safe. I personally do not feel safe walking around Braamfontein, as much as I'm a student who resides there. But I don't feel safe at all, and I don't feel safe for my siblings, even though they are boys, but I feel that they're not safe, and I feel that we need to take care of them and be very responsible when it comes to them. So I feel that safety is something that is non-existent in South Africa.
So personally, I'm a skater. Like, I skate a lot. I'm an all-round skater. I ice skate, I roller skate, I rollerblade. Yeah. And one thing that I like doing the most is ice skating. Ice skating is seen as a white people sport in South Africa. Like, I go there, it's like gang white people. So the officials, there was this one time I was skating last week Saturday I was skating. And the officials at the rink that I went to, it was like a new rink that I had never been there before. Usually at the rink that I go to, Festival Mall represent, it's like black people most of the time. Like, there's a lot of black people. But then the one that I went to recently was like filled with white people. So the officials were white. So now I'm skating, and when you skate, you have to breathe a lot. And now this mask thing has been incorporated. I'm understand would be like lentama masking now, even especially when it has to do with like active sports, like soccer. You wouldn't expect Messi to play soccer with a mask on because you have to breathe and it limits breathing. So I'm skating without my mask, and this white girl comes to me. I see her talking to her friends. All her friends are not wearing masks, you know. She comes to me, she tells me, hey bro, you need to wear a mask. Like, it's COVID protocols. And to voice my opinion, she tried to shut me down. Like, I'm an official. You can't say anything to me. I work here. So from there, I literally went off on her. Nah, it's fine. It's fine. And I skated and continued with the day just as normal. So yeah, that would be a situation where I voiced out my opinion like that and practiced my freedom of speech, I guess. The right to housing. We do have that, like we do, but then it's not really as hectic like that. You know, like in Kale Josie right now, like way too deep in Josie, there's street kids, there's and they're living on the streets, you know. And one example that I would make is shelters, like homeless shelters. I remember there was this girl, Skeem, shout out to Skeem. So Skeem is basically a homeless lady that's always asking for money, like close to where we live at Diggz. She's always outside. Like everyone that lives at Student Diggz knows Skeem. So Skeem once told me, in order for her to go to a homeless shelter at night, she needs to cop out like 5 rand. You know, so I feel like that's one of those things that South Africa needs to tackle now. Homeless shelters be free. So right now, let's say she's not asking for money today, which means she doesn't have a place to go sleep. That violates the rights of the housing, you get. So yeah, that's a right that it is there, but then it's not really as enforced.
I don't remember coming across this particular right in the Bill of Rights. I don't know if it's existent, but I was going to say that if there's any rights that we need to look into introducing, is the right to employment. Because what is the use of having the right to education if whatever degree that you go and study for does not help you in return? Like, I feel that we need to create these degrees in a way that makes them useful, because you'll study and then are you going to get employed? So even though people have the option to start businesses and stuff like that, I think they should have rights to funding. There should be a right for people to be employed. So it must be mandatory that if you go study, some way, somehow, you need to become employed.
So personally, I feel like freedom of speech hasn't really been applied like that a lot, especially given the current situation, Ricky Rick's death. I'm such a huge fan. Well, I was a huge fan, still am, still listen to his music. If I feel like we had like a space or a platform in a sense where people can just openly come and talk about certain things like that, that's when we will actually limit the suicide rates that are currently in South Africa right now. Like men, for example, men have like the highest suicide rates in South Africa because obvious. You start talking about being depressed, you know, like we're trying to limit certain things. I feel like South Africa should really enforce the whole freedom of speech thing. So yeah, that's one thing that I feel like South Africa should just put out there. Well, the world in general as a whole, especially for men, because men do not really have those open spaces.
I probably didn't meditate on the right until it was violated. I hate to make this example, but one day my mom picked on my diary and I stopped writing, keeping a diary, because I felt, I went home and I asked myself, this is personal information, how did you know this, you know? And I was just so uncomfortable by that, and I think I remember myself going on to find out information if it was right for her to like pick on my diary. And that's when I realized that I actually have the right to privacy, but I sort of discontinued keeping a diary, like I don't do it anymore.
I wouldn't say all young people, but we don't really care about the land. Especially millennials, you know, like we weren't really raised in an environment where ulwela to go to specific areas, ulwela to sitting in like a specific seat in the bus, you know, like white only areas, you know, like I feel like older people, the older generation is the people that really fought for the land like that, and they are the people that are really pushing it. We just like, it's vibes, you know, like I can go anywhere I want to go, and yeah. So that's why I feel like as young people, millennials specifically, we don't really fight for the land like that, because now we are born free, in a sense, you get. Hence why ungakhuluma nomuntu omdala umbuze ngeland, and they're gonna have like a hectic topic on it. Like you're gonna have like a full-on conversation. And then uza kumuntu omncane umbuza, hey bro, what's going on? Like tell me about land, dog. it's not really a thing that we even look into like that as people, you know, like we're looking for the flashiness. Not all of us, but most of us are looking for the flashiness, you know, like you wouldn't find a young person saying, I want to buy land and like build a house. Sonke sicabanga ama-apartments in Sandton, be in Sandton right now. Yeah, so yeah, we're looking for the fanciness in it. So I wouldn't really say we're fighting for the land or we actually take land hectically like that.
I cannot really speak for the masses in particular, but I can speak for myself. Personally, I do care about the land. And the reason why I care about the land is that the more space we have, the less conflict exists in families. If everybody has their own space, then people feel they can be safe. You know, like I'll make an example. Actually, I'll change my statement. I think the youth does care about the land because everybody's posting on Instagram with the keys, new apartment, because everybody wants peace of mind. So if you want a peace of mind and you want your own space, then you definitely should care about the land. It's just that, yeah, there's politics into that, but I think people should care about the land. I personally care about the land. I remember 2 years ago, I wanted to buy Loli, and the dynamics were, oh, I'm still far from finishing my degree, so perhaps I just should buy one, and stuff. And also, you know, in as much as I care about the land, it's a thing of government developments. We're not going to have like proper sanitation and amanzi and stuff, you know. But I care about the land, and finishing my degree, living Brampfontein, I don't want to go back home. I want that peace of mind and space. So I care about the land, and if you're as long as there's space. People who have medical aid will feel that it's unfair for them to share their resources with people who don't have medical aids. Because what are they paying for, you know? But I feel that in times of need, if there's a public institution, government that cannot help me, then if the space in a private institution, then I should be assisted there. That's what I believe. It should be an issue or a thing of need, you know? But if my basics are covered where I don't have to pay, then I'll definitely go to a government hospital.
Yeah, you do. You personally do. Because I mean, the free hospitals that are given to like the poor, like the middle class and poor people without medical aids, they don't really have the facilities that rich people or well-off people might have. And some people might have diseases that rich people have, but then because they're poor and they're middle class, they can't really get those services. You get. At the same time, this is not even supposed to be something that we say it's alright, because it's supposed to push you as a person. Now, I want to work to actually get that far to afford this healthcare. You get. So it's something that's supposed to push us as people. Yeah, but at the same time, we do deserve it. So it's really a 50-50 situation in a sense. Facts, they are. Like, they really are being violated. Because at the end of the day, girls have been pushing this narrative, yeah, my body, my rules, my rights. And when you tell someone to not do anything with their body, even if it means that they might be put in a situation where they're on the verge of death, then you are violating their rights and what they want to do, in a sense. So yeah, I feel like they are being violated.
I was still in school and I was quite young when the law for termination of pregnancy was passed, and even though at that time I was kind of confused as to how a child can go and terminate pregnancy without their parents' knowledge, I was just like, how do you do that? You know, so since that law was passed that you don't need anyone's consent, not even your parents or your partners, to terminate a pregnancy, if the nurse says I can't, then that is definitely a violation of my rights, because I probably would have a reason why, you know, and under like different circumstances. And I'd like to believe that, you know, with other girls, they do it because of rape and stuff, and it would be such a triggering thing to raise a child that you conceived out of such circumstances, you know. So if my parent and my partner cannot stop me from doing it, why should a nurse do that? So yeah, I think it'll be a violation of my right.
Section 9 of Bill of Rights. I told you that it's one of those books that you read and you know that something is there, but then you don't really know the specific section.
Section 9 of the Bill of Rights. I'm not quite sure what Section 9 of the Bill of Rights is. And maybe they did the sections thing to make things easier for us. Perhaps I should just take a moment one day and sit down and revise this Bill of Rights because, yeah. I'm not aware what Section 29 of the Bill of Rights says, but thank you for making me aware of what Section 9 does say, which is something that just made me realize that we're actually not all equal in the eyes of the law. There's just so many things, that comes into play when you think about equality in South Africa. But now I do know, and I'm going to hold on to that truth.
Fees haven't fallen. I mean, I won't lie, I sell accommodation and I see the rates. I've been selling accommodation now for like 2 years. And I see the rates of the prices of the rooms increasing like every single year. It's not a thing with izoyehla, it increases. Even the fees as a schooling, it increases. I personally have a friend, Berakeleza, he's trying to do his second degree right now, but then because his funder, I won't really mention names, conflict of interest, but his funder literally didn't pay fees for first year. He was blocked from registering for his recent degree. So there were so many things in between that he had to go do, and he couldn't really afford that amount. It was like 70K in a sense. And he had to like apply for bursaries, look for like, I'm an EFF, oh fuck, I'm mentioning political parties. But yeah, I'm a political parties that work with schools to go fight for him. Yeah, so gratefully so, he managed to get something, but it was way too expensive. You get, like the fees were just way too expensive. So I wouldn't really say I'm a fees because even now I'm register, the fees are more expensive than what he had to pay. Yeah, and he's doing his first year and it's for a different degree now. Shout out to Chapando too.
When Fees Must Fall started, I was only watching like on the headlines and the news, and I was like, yo, there's really students who are protesting. By the time I get to university, things will be smooth, Moss. And when I first enrolled in 2019 after my gap year, I found out that that wasn't the case. My mom was so certain, she's like, yeah, well, I don't have money, but I'm sure you're gonna study and stuff like that. I indeed registered at Wits and started my degree, but I did not have the funds for accommodation, for allowance. And in 2020, when the year began and I had to go to register for my second year, they said that I had historic debt and that I owed the university and that I couldn't study further. And it was a thing of having to write motivational letters, applying for this and that. So that should answer your questions to say that Wits wants their money. Universities, higher education wants their money. There's no fees have fallen, that sort of thing. And as the year increases in my course, the more expensive the course actually gets. So fees have not fallen. We're still gonna protest and cry about the same thing. Fees have not fallen.
Hi, my name is Tabeka Gwili and I am a part-time law student as well as have a bit of experience working with the Center for Human Rights at the Free State University. So today is Human Rights Day, and as we're celebrating human rights, we are also taking a look at the Bill of Rights and what this means to you. Now, before we look at the different rights contained in the Constitution, Skeem, there are two very important things that I would like us to take note of. The first thing is that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. That is what is said in law. What this means is that there can be no law in South Africa that goes against the principles or the values contained in the Constitution. So what the Constitution says about your rights stands, and it will always stand. The second thing that's also important, Skeem, is that the interpretation of these rights. Now, the first right that we're going to be looking at is Section 16 of the Constitution under the Bill of Rights, which basically says that you have the right to freedom of expression. Now, from this, you can already tell that you have the right to an opinion, you have the right to have ideas and to express your ideas in a creative way. But there are subsections in this section specifically that tell you there are things you can do, but there are things you are not allowed to do. So as much as you have the right to this opinion and you have the right to express yourself, subsections in subsection 2 says that you cannot, 1, entice violence or war, and 2, you cannot discriminate another person based on their gender, their race, or their ethnicity. So it basically means that you cannot discriminate a person based on their color of their skin. And this is according to the Constitution. So if you have had experience where you were discriminated or prejudiced because of the way you look, because of your skin, or because of your gender, then that means that your constitutional right has been violated. That is what Section 16 of the Constitution says, which protects your right to freedom of expression. Another right that we're going to look at, Skeem, is under Section 27, and this basically says that you have the right to healthcare, food, water, and social security. This right basically says that you have the right to access these things and that the state needs to take reasonable measures to ensure that you have access to these. Now, this is why you can go to a public hospital and there are services that you are able to get whether or not you have medical aid. I have seen Skeem asking the question, Zoguti, why can't I go to a private hospital and get the same services offered to me if I don't have a medical aid? Well, unfortunately, Skeem, the Constitution says that you have the right to access these things as long as they are reasonably available to you. There's an interesting case I want us to look at very quickly, which dealt with this a bit. I learned this in law, and if you are a law student, then you would definitely know this case. This is called the Subramoni case. So in the Subramoni case, Mr. Subramoni wanted access to a very expensive machine to help him live because he was dying. Unfortunately, the hospital said that he cannot have access to this as there is a long list of people that also need to get treatment. So he sought to bring Section 27 into the play to say that, but my constitutional right says that I have the right to access this. Now, in this instance, the court had to now find out, first of all, does he really have access to this machine? And second of all, how does the state now make sure that he gets this access? At the end of the case, it was found that the state does have a responsibility to make sure that its citizens have access to necessary health care. But the only condition, Skeem, is that it needs to be available. And in the Subramoni case, unfortunately, it found that he cannot have access to the expensive treatment because it is unavailable at the time that he needs it. Does this mean that his right was violated? Because the Constitution says that he has the right to access to it. But the court now found that, unfortunately, because the access is limited, his right would now be limited or violated. That doesn't mean, Skeem, that Section 27 does not apply. In the contrary, it does. Every citizen has the right to health care, has the right to access food, has the right to access water, and has the right to social security. And the state, which is the government, has the responsibility to ensure that every citizen has access to this. Up next, we're going to be looking at Section 29 of the Constitution, which basically says that you have the right to education. Now, this section is twofold. There's the first part and then there's a second part. The first part basically says that you have the right to basic education, which also includes adult education. And then you also have the right to further education, which is your universities, your colleges, and the sort. The second part now of this section says that if you establish an institution, your institution can be established at your own expense, but it should not discriminate, nor should it have any sort of prejudice. Now, because ikhuluma education, Skeem, you'll remember the protest, the Fees Must Fall protest, where students across the nation wanted to protest against the ever-increasing rates of university fees, college fees, basically the fees that they pay in order to get a further education. They now thought, or they now tried to bring into play this section to say that, but the Constitution says I have the right to education. Why am I being denied this right if I do not have the amount to pay for this education? I stand for this. I stood for it and I still do stand for it, Skeem Sam. Now, remember what I mentioned about rights, that as much as you have a right, there's also a responsibility or a limitation to that right. This does not necessarily mean that your right is violated. It just means that unfortunately there are things that are going to prevent you from enjoying that right in its fullness. Now, for example, let's take the right to education into play. You have the right to basic education. You have the right to access further education. The Constitution says that the state needs to do all that it reasonably can to ensure that you have access to this education or to this further education. Unfortunately, Skeem Sam, if there are limitations to this, then the Constitution cannot now force an institution to give you this education. The state needs to ensure that it takes measures to give you access to this education. But if there are limitations that prevent you from getting this education, then unfortunately, Skeem Sam, that is one of those limitations that exists when your right needs to come into play. Now, a lot of people are saying that universities need to give education for free or they shouldn't be charging so much. I don't work for a university, Skeem Sam, but I think because of the expenses that come into bringing this education or giving this education, those expenses, as the Constitution even says, are expenses that the institution needs to cover. But for them to get back those expenses, they charge students for the education. What the state needs to do is it needs to make sure that its citizens who want education have access to this education when they need to. Now, when Skeem Sam, do you think that education should be free? Considering what the Constitution says about your right to education, as well as those that want to establish institutions of education. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Do you think education should be free? You should actually read section 29 about this and tell me your thoughts as well. Another interesting section that I want us to look at, Skeem Sam, is section 30 of the Constitution. This basically gives you the right to language and culture of your choice. Remember what we said about discrimination and prejudice? That it goes against your constitutional right and it violates those of others? So the same is true with this one. This section basically says you have the right to speak whatever language you want and to practice whatever culture you want. But once again, Skeem Sam, remember what we said about responsibilities and limitations? Just because now you have the right to speak in whatever language you want or to practice whatever culture you want does not mean now that you need to violate another person's right to also enjoy their right to the language that they want or to practice the culture that they want. At the end of the day, Skeem Sam, we constantly need to practice the spirit of Ubuntu. Just because I have that right does not mean now I have the authority to violate your right. Let's respect each other's rights. Respect another person's language. Respect their culture. And they also have a responsibility to respect your language and to respect your culture in return. This is according to section 30 of the Constitution. Another section that we're going to be looking at is section 10 of the Constitution, and this basically speaks on human dignity. Now, the section says that you have the right to inherent dignity and the right to have your dignity respected and protected. Now, the question then, Skeem Sam, comes into play that now that there's vaccines and vaccinate and there's places that require you to vaccinate, is there a law that forces you to vaccinate? Now, once again, I did mention, Skeem Sam, that this is just an opinion and this is not legal authority. But according to the Constitution, you have the right to your human dignity. Human dignity now basically says that your body, who you are, and what happens with you, it needs to be respected and it needs to be protected. So you can imagine, Skeem, if you don't want something to happen to your body, a person cannot come and force you to have that thing done on your body. You, at the end of the day, have the right to say no. So Section 10 comes into play when we're even talking about vaccines as well. If there are places that require you to vaccinate, but the Constitution says that you have the right to your own bodily and human dignity, can you be forced to vaccinate if you don't want to? You can let me know your thoughts, Skeem. But remember what the Constitution says. You have the right to say no. So can they force you to vaccinate? What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, read Section 10 of the Constitution and let me know what you think they mean by human dignity. Up next, we're going to be looking at Section 9 of the Constitution, and this basically deals with equality. Now, this section says in Benjam that everyone is equal before the law and everyone needs to be treated equally. Whether or not you are blue, you are orange, you are red, umthetho uthi, Skeem, that everyone is equal before the law and they all have equal rights and deserve equal representation. Look at this section and tell me what you think it means by that.